Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Radical Feminist Perspectives. This is a women-only webinar. This series of webinars is run by radical feminists whose voices are being cancelled or silenced in universities, schools, and the media. Frustrated that we cannot share what we know in these places, we are offering this online series of webinars here. Enjoy. And today, we're going to have a discussion of Gossips, Gorgons and Crones by Caputi, and that's going to be discussed by Lierre Keith and Marian Rutigliano. So I'll hand over to Lierre and Marian.
Hi.
Morning, everyone.
Just to preface this, I have never read this book. It's not the sort of book I ever read. So just as somebody who's like very, very new to this, a minute of like what this book is about or what you're going to hear about is she makes a connection between patriarchal power and environmental destruction, particularly because of nuclear energy and nuclear issues. She notes that the power in patriarchy is that of dominance and force, but the Gossips, Gorgons, and Crones thing, that comes from powers as supernatural beings, powers as occult forces, powers as angels, principalities, and that's what the Gossips, Gorgons, and Crones are, metaphors. They are distinctly unfeminine. That's the idea. Be aware as you read it, though, that there's a lot of good stuff in here about how nuclear proliferation, nuclear energy, and our reliance on things nuclear, often naively, that's good stuff. But there's also stuff in there that you really need to pay attention to. She early on cites Gail Rubin, one of the early voices of queer theory, BDSM, and things like that. That to end patriarchy we must end the culturally constructed bipolar sex and gender system. So be aware when you're reading some stuff like this that you may find kernels of things or that you may find stuff that doesn't really fit what is otherwise a good radical feminist analysis. And she, at the end of the book, cites Anne Fausto Sterling and intersex and stuff like that. Never says anything distinctly about trans, but just when you read stuff like that, pay attention. Lierre?
Yeah, this book was written in 1993, and I read it when it first came out. And I do remember stumbling across a few of those things that we may discuss later that sort of were strange little red flags, because otherwise her analysis seems very, just solidly radical feminist. So it's a little bit odd. And I have met her a few times. I've seen her. Well, actually, let's get to the first slide because there's a little bit about her background that we can talk about too. But we don't really know where she stands on a few things, I guess is what we're saying. So just a bit of caution. And I couldn't find an updated kind of view on where she does stand about these things now. So it's just kind of a question mark. We don't really know where she's kind of gone with this or whether she's sort of dropped those pieces of it, seeing how bad it went. So she's written these books. The Age of Sex Crime is absolutely fantastic. That's about serial sex killers and how they have become heroes in patriarchy and where they come from and how they sort of got created in the culture. And I'm pretty sure there was a seminar about that book. I don't remember who did it, but somebody here, if you look on the YouTube, you'll find it. That book was covered by somebody here. And it's a very disturbing book, but it's absolutely, you sort of have to read it. And then this book that we're doing now, The Gossips, Gorgons, and Crones. And then she had another book, Goddesses and Monsters, which is about women in popular culture. And her thing is always about the sort of mythic structure of Western civilization. And there's this constant struggle between patriarchy trying to murder the goddess and murder women and murder the earth. And then various ways that there's always this sort of biophilic urge that women have to fight back. And so she sees this struggle kind of on that plane happening a lot across popular culture. And that's what that book is about as well. And then this other book I have not read yet, the one about a manifesto for Earth Mother. I don't know. I would assume it's good, but I haven't read it. And then she also was really good friends with Mary Daly. So she's the one who collaborated with her. If you've read the Wikidary, Jane Caputi's the co-author of that. So there's some Mary Daly isms, sort of Mary Daly language that comes through in this book, and including the whole title about the gossips, the Gorgons and the Crones. There's this attempt to kind of reclaim those as female figures of power, that we shouldn't let these be insults. We should instead sort of go back to the roots of what these words mean, and sort of the role that they've played in the culture as strong women, as women who won't shut up, as women who have some kind of power that patriarchy is trying to suppress. So that's kind of her gig. Okay, next slide. She
Thanks for
also had,
mentioning Mary Daly and that
yeah.
reference to the book, because when I read it, I'm like, it's like all these references to Mary Daly. Is she shoehorning this in here? But I can see that it's not shoehorned, that she definitely had a relationship. And
No, it was definitely, it's been her sort of her
yeah.
world as well, is that sort of same thing that Mary Daly did, in terms of trying to see these mythic beings as, archetypes that we can, I don't know, draw on. Are they real? Does she think that these are real powers? I'm not sure, like how far along any of this goes, but it's definitely intriguing. And I know for some women, it really speaks to them very profoundly. So, and then she put out these two, gosh, my slides are a little bit messed up. I hate when that happens. Anyway, these are the two documentaries that she did. And the first one's called The Pornography of Everyday Life. And I highly recommend that. It's very disturbing. It's a little old now, but she did a great job on that. And I saw her, one of the times that I saw her speaking, we watched that video. And then also she was part, we've advanced a tiny bit too far. The Earth at Risk, she came to that event. I was the co-organizer of that event. So if you get the either the book or the DVD, you will see her speaking, and she did a fantastic job. And yeah, and the DVD is a little bit better, because there you see all the images that she's talking about, and her analysis is very heavy on the images. So you can read what she wrote in the book, but if you get the DVD, which is also on YouTube, you can just watch it for free. You'll get to see her whole presentation, which was really good. So, and I haven't read this other I haven't seen this other documentary that she did, Feed the Green. I'm sort of curious about it now. I hadn't heard about it, so I may look that up later today. So, okay, next slide. And then you can jump up, but we already did. Okay, next one. That one we've done. Okay,
I mean,
so this is her. Go ahead.
it makes it clear why she chose to. I mean, one question I'm reading this is like, why is she writing about nuclear energy? Like, where did the connection to the fates come from? And you've explained it. And then if you're reading it and thinking, it's like, okay, this is really about nuclear energy. Where did that come from?
Right.
And I think this next what you're going to talk about explains that even more. But because it, like I said, as a naive reader to this book and these types of books, it's good. It's good to have it explained.
So she says, this is sort of the laying out what this book is about. Essentially, my perspective in this book is based in the feminist critique that a complex of patriarchal traditions is producing conditions of analogous private and public horror, from the nuclear family to nuclear war, and tempting, quote, the end of the world. These traditions include a sex and gender system that continually invents male and female as two opposed and unequal entities, and legitimates masculine domination of the feminine in whatever form these take. For example, males and females, whites and people of color, technology and nature. The refusal to acknowledge the intelligence and soul of life forms other than the human form, the idolization of the machine, the romanticization of patriarchal taboo violation, to go where no man has gone before, the worship of a humanized and solely male divinity, the denial of chaos. So that's kind of what the book is about. Yeah, okay, so next slide. So she has this thing about the worldview that she's promoting is very old and also new. So she has a lot of quotes from different Native American women, and also a lot of poetry are sort of woven throughout, where she's trying to invoke this much older holistic worldview that is based on sort of a gynocentric. There's a women's power is at the center, and that the cosmos is created by the female, that it's that the male is a subset of female. So simultaneously, Gossips of Gorgons and Crones is an invocation of a worldview that promises an amelioration of these conditions, a worldview that, although young, is also very old, for it is rooted in tribal, non-Western, and pre-modern European traditions. This worldview imagines and passionately invokes the nonviolent end of the world, the demise of patriarchal cosmogony, and an ongoing encounter with the powers of chaos. The New World chaos I envision is founded upon principles that include tolerance, egalitarianism, autonomy, communal harmony, equal distribution of goods, a focus upon responsibility rather than rights, a transformation of the normative sadomasochistic power ethos that infuses all aspects of everyday life, a transcendence of oppositional sex and gender, and an embrace of familiar value. Instead of family values, she has familiar values, those that recognize the interconnectedness and sacredness of all life forms. So yeah, I think this is all kind of radical feminist values that which we don't. This is she's opposing it with these sort of better value system that she's sort of assembled from things that are both very old and very new. So that's sort of what's at the bottom of the book. This is sort of her baseline of where she's going with this. So Marian, anything you want to add?
No, next slide, please.
The basic myths, motivations, and methods behind geocide, the wasting of the organic and elemental worlds, and the attempted annihilation of the planet, are rooted in gynocidal and misogynist paradigms. To resist, survive, and end this long-standing gynocidal, geocidal rampage, we desperately need to speak of female powers. So again, this is, I think, a very radical feminist kind of view about what's gone wrong, that there's this war that's been going on for thousands of years that is a war against both the living planet and women, and that this sort of runs through the entire time of patriarchy. And so from her perspective, she wants to oppose this by these female capital P powers that whether or not they're real as some kind of cosmological beings, that it's still there's some idea that we can tap into this power that is this sort of gynocide, that's sort of gynocentric and geocentric, biocentric worldview, and that those are the myths that we need to be sort of reinvigorating or reinventing in some way. So this is sort of her gig throughout, is that the the mythic making part of patriarchy is something that we can resist by either reinventing or reinvigorating older myths that sort of embody these values, and that there's something very powerful about women doing that. So that's one of the sort of the underlying themes of the book. So Marian, do you have anything you want to add here?
No, she does. Well, she says early on that an insight that recurs in countless ancient myths and stories is that in the beginning is the word. So that language, including naming, dreaming, and imaging, does not merely reflect or describe reality, it constructs it. It constructs it. Simultaneously, it forms the consciousness and social selves of individual speakers. True in some ways, again, a little like a little bell ringing of okay, language all of a sudden changes how we see reality. That I think that's true, although she talks about that in a good way, and not and doesn't really see what damage that can do. And again, going back to the if we call men women, if we call women men, again, that's not really part of the book. What she goes on to is nuclear energy, and when that started, I'm like, okay, I understand where this is coming from, and I see the the feminist analysis. I mean, and she goes on to talk about all things nuclear: kids' toys, jokes, gallows humor, drinks, food dishes. You go to you go to Area 51, you go to places where where nuclear tests were done. You go to a restaurant and there's like nuclear scrambled eggs on the menu. So that just speaks to how pervasive it is. So again, when you're reading this, focus in on on what she is saying about nuclear energy and the feminist analysis that links it to patriarchal values as opposed to gossips, Gorgons and Crones.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so my constellation of the gossip, Gorgon, and Crone is literally that, an assemblage of three shimmering metaphors. These metaphors are capable of initiating us into the realm of the powers. They inspire us to feats of intuition, comprehension, and articulation, enabling us to see and speak the truth about nuclear sexual dominations. At the same time, they are capable of summoning necessary transmutational faculties. So too, when we consciously mythologize, we perform deliberate steps of comprehension. We choreograph intuitively and deliberately a system of symbols and stories that dance our insights about chaos, cosmos, and the nature of being. These symbols invoke world-changing powers from without and from within. So this is what she's trying to do with this book. She's trying to get us to name patriarchy, to understand the horrors of all of these things, and also, she's offering some hope that our sort of this new consciousness, that we can create a new set of symbols, a new way to understand our place in nature, new social order that would not be this kind of patriarchal domination. And I don't know how much she believes in these other beings as actual other beings, and how much of it's just, well, the sort of the mythic structure of human consciousness that needs a shift. I just don't know. So, okay, next slide. So, language, including naming, dreaming, and okay, so Marian already read part of this, does not merely reflect or describe reality, it constructs it, which is true. That is definitely how, we're pattern-seeking creatures. We are myth-making creatures. This is very complex in human consciousness. And there's definitely something to be said about understanding the myths of patriarchy and how they, constrain women's, just capacity to live our lives, and the way that sort of like rape myths, keep women feeling guilty and terrified, and all of this, like there's something that feminism gives us where we're able to break through, the myths of patriarchy, and seeing through the myths of the religion, and the myths of rape culture and all of this. So I don't think she's wrong about this. So it forms our consciousness and the social selves of individual speakers. Language is the primary locus of socialization. So I mean, Julia Penelope wrote about this. This was her life's work as well, as how we absorb the language of patriarchy, and then that becomes how we think, that it's really hard to think outside of it when it's the only language that you have. So then she says, a network of images and metaphors similarly maintain our enmeshment in and loyalty to nuclearism. By nuclearism, I mean a worldview combining disrespect for the atom with the exploitation, eroticization, and worship of nuclear technology as a means to extend elite men's domination over the elements and the earth. So she's putting those two things together. That patriarchy involves this love of nuclear power and this high technology, all of which is just, bringing on the end of the planet. So, okay, next slide.
One of the things she talks about is she quotes a guy named Lifton, Robert J. Lifton, who was one of the first people to write about cult mind control. And he first wrote about it in terms of in terms of things like the Manchurian Candidate and stuff like that. But he's really just a lot of incredible insights and work that he did on cult mind control. So she quotes him by talking about the phrase he came up with, radical futurelessness, due to an expectation of annihilation in our lifetimes. That's how pervasive it is, and it's more than just what the technology is. It's a widespread fundamentalism, Lifton says, a sense of radical absurdity, psychic numbing, including the blocking of sensation, the repression of disturbing thoughts and images, and a dulling denial, even to the point of creating a double life, and a tendency to identify with the bomb, and even, as we shall see, to worship it. So this is more than just, Robert J. Lifton, amazing scholar, that's in the chat. So this is more than just what is being done technologically. It's a mind control of an entire citizenry that, hey, it's not so bad that we're exploding bombs in the desert. That who thought that was okay? You live in New Mexico or Nevada, and who thinks that that's okay? Lierre.
Yeah,
That's
and the way that, in the same way that people in hostage conditions come to identify with the perpetrator, and of course, in the same way that children will identify with the abuser in an abusive family, there's this point that a lot of people have come to identify with the sort of nuclear power and nuclear bombs because we don't have any way out. It's the same thing. We're all being held hostage now around the planet to this technology. None of us control it. We can't stop it. It just is. It could destroy everything. And so even back in the 50s, when this all first started, I mean, it was brand new. I think we're sort of used to it now. Like he says, we've gotten numb to it, but this was a big deal because nobody had ever had to face the end of the world before, like the end of all life. So that's the first time. So she has all these examples from popular culture where this idea of the atom bomb and missiles and the irradiation of everybody is um, either used as a joke, it's celebrated in weird ways. Sometimes it's quite uneasy, but it's still there. So there's just this way that the the how have we come to terms with the fact that we all live under this threat? So she has pictures of jewelry that's atomic inspired. That's what they say in the ad, and it looks like that sort of famous image of the atoms running around the nucleus. There's at a toy convention. There's a nightlight that's a mushroom cloud for children. This just seems like the stuff of nightmares. Like, why would you buy this for your child? The
I
cover of
know
Guns N'
about that. Oh
that
my
was
God.
really horrifying. But this is exactly what she's talking about. The cover of Guns and Ammo magazine, which you probably haven't seen in England, but we have it here. And they announced the gun of the month as an atomic class magnum. So this thing about things being nuclear or atomic, now this is just an adjective that we use all the time. There's a real estate ad with a mushroom cloud, and it promises that you'll still own the whole after they nuke the place where you live. There's this ad for Oakley sunglasses where the entire house is covered with these sort of high-tech shades, and it's supposed to be saying that you'll survive an atomic blast, and that's how good their sunglasses are. So it sort of enters popular culture as something that's sort of funny and sort of not. And then the atomic fireball candy, and then those garbage pail kids. I don't know if you remember that, Marian, from the 80s.
Oh, those were awful.
Horrendous. Those were
Oh,
horrendous.
terrible.
Yeah, I'd completely forgotten about those. They were like bubblegum, little packs of like if you can think of baseball cards. So they were little cards that came with bubblegum and you could trade them and whatever. But the 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 characters in these cards were um like mutants from a nuclear
Yeah,
war. And they were meant I don't know, were they meant to be funny? Is this a way that children are just sort of metabolizing the trauma of living in a nuclear age? But I
yeah,
remember, I mean, I was already adult when they came out, but they were
horrible.
they were horrible. Anyway,
And
I had completely
they
forgotten
would
about
find
those.
garbage to live on. That was the food. They would
Yeah,
find this just,
yeah,
nuclear and even the phrase, it's like you put something in the microwave, I'm gonna nuke it. I
yeah,
mean, just the
exactly.
simplest
Yeah.
thing, it's I'm gonna nuke it.
And then apparently there's all these war toys that have nuclear themes that you can get for your children. And that, of course, is quite disturbing as well. And I just remember we only had two rules kind of when I was growing up about toys. We had no war toys, no Barbies. That was the two things my mom was like, not doing it. And I just got to point out it worked. Here I am. And I really appreciate what she was trying to do with that. But the idea that you would give your child not just a gun, but like a nuclear weapon toy is just, yeah, it's pretty horrible. So anyway, okay, next slide. I think the next one was, oh yeah, okay. So this sex violent use of technical term nuke speaks eloquently to feminist insights about sex and violence under male supremacy. In that system, male and female are defined as inevitably attracted to each other and at the same time inherently unequal. Domination is identified with masculinity, submissiveness with femininity. Hence, an unsubmissive woman, any unsubmissive women are labeled, quote, bitches. The male partner in the heterosexist relationship is supposed to be taller, stronger, richer, and older. In short, more powerful. The female partner is supposed to be shorter, weaker, poorer, and younger. In short, powerless. As feminist legal theorist Catherine McKinnon has argued, under this system of male supremacy, inequality itself becomes sexy. Dominance and submission themselves become heavily invested with eroticism. Inevitably, then, sex and violence become mutually definitive, and acts of dominance and submission, up to and including acts of violence, are experienced as sexually arousing as sex itself. So, this to me is always sort of the core of the radical feminist analysis, as opposed to a more liberal analysis, where you understand that the sex act is constructed as being inherently something about domination, so that the man, man fucks woman, subject, verb, object. So this is what she's pointing out one more time. And so she's adding the nuclear piece to this, that, and as we'll see, that this sense of nuclear as being a male sexual act against the planet, and then how they've absorbed this terminology into how they speak about actually having sex. So it's, the most powerful thing is the most destructive thing, is the most necrophilic thing, and therefore it must be sex for men under patriarchy. So, Marian, anything you want to throw in?
Well, two things is, one is, I mean, we even have the nuclear family.
Right.
But even besides that, this, you talked about, this is the fundamentals of radical feminist analysis. Probably one of the most difficult things to talk about with women who've come from a liberal feminist background, where it's just like, well, not all men are like that. Not my Nigel. It's wonderful. It's pervasive. It pervades everything. Even in supposedly good situations, it's there all the time. It affects all women. She talks about women speaking up against it as being viewed as castrating. There's a section about Anita Hill testifying, and how that it was a betrayal of another man, a betrayal of a black man, a black woman, and that it was just that it's unnatural to do that it's like a castration, and that liberal feminism, what we are not, doesn't agree with, on a really fundamental level, what radical feminism discovered is that patriarchy, domination, is eroticized. I mean, in everything, it's eroticized in every way.
Next slide, please. So then she has a section on nuclear pornography, where you can see all of this coming together. Acts of technological dominance participate in this sex violence continuum. In this world ordered by patriarchal power, quote, fucking and quote, nuking are deeply interconnected expressions of domination. The Nuke the Bitches t-shirt, and what she's referring to here is, at the Seneca Women's Peace Camp, there were men who would get the t-shirts that women had, and they would write "Nuke the Bitches" over the t-shirt. And so then they made their own t-shirts also that said "Nuke the Bitches till they glow in the dark." So yeah, that makes it quite clear. Is by no means unique. It is characteristic of much of the verbal and visual imagery of what I call nuclear pornography. These images link nuclear technology, weapons, and warfare to patriarchal constructions of desire and eroticism. So of course, because it's about domination, men have to eroticize it. And so, they experience even the concept of nuclear destruction as something that might be sexually arousing, which is horrible. I don't know, like, it's just complete necrophilia. Okay, next slide.
Even Dr. Strangelove. I don't know who saw that
there.
movie, but at the end of it, General Jack D. Ripper is riding a missile. I mean, sticking out from between his legs, just riding this missile to destroy the world.
Yeah. And I think that was done very consciously. I think the part
totally.
that in that movie, that's a critique of it, but it's hard to know sometimes with men. Are they just critiquing it, or are they wallowing in it? So anyway, environmental historian Carolyn Merchant traces the implicit sexual violence of the 17th century scientific revolution as revealed through its characteristic metaphors of mastering, disrobing, and penetrating nature as a female form. Merchant also describes the objectification of the earth as, during this time, the planetary body became seen as a mechanism or a corpse, though still a feminized one. because before that, the metaphor used to be a living planet that was quite female. And so over the course of the scientific revolution, the world becomes a machine rather than a living body. And of course, that machine can be taken apart. Okay, anyway, such metaphor rapidly became habitual and provided the basis for much of 20th century nuclearist imagery. Spencer Weir notes, 20th century scientists and journalists who wanted to stimulate public interest in physics found their most striking phrases in this old metaphor of aggressive pursuit. Atomic scientists investigated, quote, the most intimate properties of matter, indeed penetrated, quote, hidden mysteries, quote, tore away the veils to reveal inner secrets, and quote, laid bare the structure of atoms. Language about breaking apart the indivisible atom could be openly belligerent. Already in 1905, a friend told Rutherford that another physicist was, quote, so anxious to bust atoms artificially that he would have tried it with a cold chisel before long. A quarter century later, Millikan wrote of, quote, the satisfaction in smashing a resistant atom. So here's the violence and the sexual violence that's kind of in the sort of scientific project as well. Okay, next slide. So she makes connections between sexual and nuclear violence. She's got 3 points. So this is number 1. Violence against women and violence against the earth, legitimized and promoted by both patriarchal religion and science, are interconnected assaults rooted in the eroticization of domination. The gynocidal culture's image of woman as object and victim is paralleled by contemporary representations that continually show the earth as a toy, machine, or violated object, as well as by the religious and scientific ideology that legitimates the possession, contamination, and destruction of Mother Earth. And if you watch her movie that she made, The Pornography of Everyday Life, you'll see this. She has image after image of the earth being stabbed, being, chopped apart, being essentially, sexually violated. And it's very, very disturbing. You wouldn't think there was so much of this across the culture, but there really is. She's accumulated it's very disturbing just how constant this image is about the earth being violated. Okay, Marian, you want to throw in anything?
There's a chapter in there about fathering, and fathers are supposed to be these like benign people, that protect and but the US and our nuclear ambitions as a controlling, domineering father is made apparent. I mean, there's cover-ups of nuclear accidents, there's secrecy, child sexual abuse, and child sexual abuse, which you cover up, is like covering up nuclear accidents. I don't know if you realize that a significant proportion, probably a majority of the officers, military officers who run the nuclear programs are women. And for a long time, it was just men before women became more involved, and it was considered a terrible assignment. Men just did not want to be, have to have anything to do with the nuclear program because we weren't using them. We weren't actually using them to kill people. And so all they had to do was keep track of these things, make sure it was safe, make sure that they weren't going to break down, make sure there was no accidents, constant record keeping and things like that. And so men gradually just like got out of it and abandoned these male officers, abandoned these to women. And so now it's mostly female officers. And it used to be, for the guys who were in it, for the men who were in it, they hated doing it. There was no esprit de corps. And with mostly women officers running it now, there is an esprit de corps and there is a deep sense of protecting people, of really protecting people, of making sure we don't ever want to use these things. And yeah, we'll do all this record keeping and we'll make sure that these things are properly repaired and nothing's breaking down to protect people. So it's a completely different mindset.
Just as a throwaway little anecdote, years and years ago, my mother had a serious boyfriend, and then after long after she was divorced, and then they broke up, but they remained friends. And he put her down as a reference. He was a historian, so the only job he had, because he was an African historian, the only job he could get was working for defense at the Pentagon, doing those kinds of reports that you do about, various conflicts in the world and whether the Pentagon needs to pay attention. So that's where he ended up having to get a job, which he hated, but he had to get this security clearance. So they sent this woman up to interview my mom about whether she thought that, he was stable enough essentially to have a job in the defense, in the DIA. And she said, well, he's this and he's that. And he's all right. And at the very end, she's like, just don't let him get too close to any of the buttons. Okay. And the woman stopped and she put down her notebook and she looked at my mom and she says, you need to know every single woman that I talk to says this about their ex. Every single one. Well, he's basically all right. Don't let him get too close to the button. It's like women know. They know. Like, how have these men ended up in all this power? All right, next slide. In a symbolic system in which the penis is consistently linked with weaponry and nuclear blasts with ejaculations, nuclear holocaust is frequently celebrated, however subtly, as the ultimate orgasm, the ultimate matricide, the ultimate snuff scene. So there it is. And she has all of this backed up. She's got all these different examples of this from pop culture, from, just across the culture. She's found all these examples of men saying this essentially, and from pornography and all kinds of places. And it's just, again, it's very radical feminist analysis, but of course, always disturbing that anybody would think this about, their sexual act, that it's nuclear destruction is just horrible. So nothing else to say there. All right, next slide. The ubiquitous metaphors linking virility with weapons of cosmic destruction are then no mere figures of speech, but symbols and images actively structuring reality. As that weaponry has progressed to the destructiveness of nuclear arms, that culturally constructed virility has become ever more spectacularly virulent. So this is where we are in patriarchy. And this book was written again in 1993. So none of this has gotten any better. It's only gotten worse. And of course, the destruction of the planet continues apace. Before we started the webinar this morning, we were talking about the terrible heat domes that are happening across the United States. Yeah, I mean, we're just full on into this now. The situation is quite serious, and it just seems to be a mass jerk off for men, most men anyway. Marian, anything you want to add to this lovely situation that we're in?
There's something in the comments. Someone was told by a male academic who has met the people in charge of the nuclear buttons that they're the kind of people that you want in charge, calm and rational. Things have changed. The World War II generation, all those men who fought, especially in the Pacific, but even the ones in Europe who knew that they were going to get sent to the Pacific, you could not convince any of them at all, or very few of them, that we shouldn't have done that and that it was a mistake, because they all knew that they would have, had to invade the Japanese mainland, and American military casualties alone were speculated to be about 1 million men, and that's aside from the Japanese and the civilians and things like that. But as that cohort has died off and is almost gone now, younger people are really much more calm and rational about it. It's like, this is something we never want to do, and the ones who press the buttons have to be calm and rational. The men just didn't like, the male officers just didn't like having to do it because it was boring. We weren't going to use them, so it was kind of boring. But yeah, it's changed somewhat now, and you'll find a lot of these people saying it's just like, if I have to do it, I will, but I don't ever want to have to do it. Push that button.
Well, next slide. So then she has nuclear theology. Nuclear technology is imbued with a sacred aura. Frequently, it is cast as either a deity or a direct manifestation of the deity's will. The patriarchal god manifests as a techno-deity who can now instantly torch the world. So I think she's right on target with this. Okay, next slide. And she has all these examples. So Caputi makes the case that nuclear weapons share attributes with traditional religious descriptions of divinity: awesome limitless power, omniscience, eternity, omnipresence, mystery, irrationality. And then she quotes this guy who's a historian: technological culture has made a death machine its deity. So that's fairly grim, and I think quite accurate. Marian, anything you want to add?
No, somebody's saying, they've never met anybody in charge of the buttons, and you won't. I mean, it's like, anybody who does that for a living isn't going to tell you that that's what they do for a living. And yeah, descriptions of divinity. The people who actually kind of know what these weapons can do are like, I don't ever want to have to do it. But you'll hear, I mean, look at discussions on social media. These, like men who know absolutely nothing about it are just like, oh, just drop a nuke on them. Oh, just, drop a bomb on them. Because it's part of this awesome and limitless power that men feel like they have or are entitled to or are being denied.
Right.
Same thing with all this, everything else that falls into what men wish that they could do, the power that they wish they did have.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay, next slide. So she's got these examples. The first atomic test bomb, as you probably know, was named Trinity. Oppenheimer quoted the Bhagavad Gita, "I am become death, the shadow of worlds," when he saw the bomb go off. After the first use of that bomb, Truman intoned, "We thank God. It has come to us instead of our enemies, and we pray that he may guide us to use it in his ways and for his purposes." As if a nuclear bomb could ever be a purpose of any kind of loving God in the world, right? Reporter described the Trinity explosion. One felt as though he had been privileged to witness the birth of the world, to be present at the moment of creation when the Lord said, "Let there be light." I just can't imagine a woman feeling that this had anything to do with giving birth. Yeah, I mean, just the massive destruction on that level has just got nothing to do with bringing life into the world. So here we have this, the ultimate necrophilia of patriarchy. Okay, next slide. In trying to fathom why Western science invented the technology of atomic destruction, we might also recall Alice Walker's insight: it is not inventedness, but rather unnaturalness. She asks us to realize, quote, that even tiny insects in the South American jungle know how to make plastic. They have simply chosen not to cover the earth with it. Atomic technology continues to be pursued not because Western patriarchy is the most, quote, advanced culture on earth, but because nuclearist power so completely recapitulates the dominant paradigms of phallic sexuality, power, and divinity. So I think she's right on with this. What do you think, Marian?
Yeah, and it's and people are just sort of like, she talks about numbing after that. People are just sort of numb to it. It's just like, this is just the way it is. And that, and again, I mean, she quotes Lifton, the same guy, talking about this mental deadening as part of a complex of phenomena he calls psychic numbing, involving the partial shutdown of mental facilities and emotional responses, denial, repression, and apathy in the face of disaster. Psychic numbing is a condition he contends affects all of us living under constant nuclear threat. What he said sounds an awful lot like PTSD. It sounds an awful lot like an entire culture in the grips of cult mind control and post-traumatic stress or continuing anxiety and stress. So we live with this as just like, well, this is just the way it is.
Right. Okay, next slide. So then she's got this bit about psychic activism. So in her 1976 essay, A Dream in Female, which I remember that essay, Barbara Sterrett speaks of the need for resistant women to reacquire and reacquaint ourselves with the psychic powers, capital P, that everywhere in the world have been associated with females: witchcraft, spellcasting, prophecy, cursing, the evil eye, and so on. In doing so, she argues, we will generate visionary alternatives to the world as we know it. Thus, we can actively will, through symbols, myths, and language, an extraordinary shift in consciousness. Sterrett sees this psychic mutation as essential to our survival in a world increasingly dominated by the emotionless objectivity of machines, epitomized by the computer. So this is part of her hope for us, is that we can, I don't know, kind of reclaim or get in touch with this sort of deep power that might be there in the cosmos for us. I don't know, again, how much Jane Caputi thinks that this is something real that could be actualized. I know that when I was younger, you know, I mean, at 17, 18, 19, very young, just getting involved in radical feminism, and I came across some of these ideas, like, you know, that the Starrett essay and books like The Wonderground, and then, you know, there was always sort of that part of that sort of quadrant of the peace camp or whatever, where women really thought that if we, you know, could do our witchy activities, that we would somehow transmute patriarchy and the fence would fall and the nuclear bombs would all go away. And, you know, we did have this power that was, if we could just cosmologically sort of tap into it. And I mean, you know, none of that really turns out to be true. I did want to believe very much when I was younger that this could be true. So I don't know how much she means it as something that, you know, is really possible, or whether it's just, you know, sort of that shift in the culture that we need, that, you know, can recognize the great power just of life, that is a wondrous thing, and that, you know, that we need to have a gynocentric and geocentric, biocentric worldview again, and that power can certainly inspire us to be activists, or whether or not, um, you know, there is something psychic there that we can use. I'm not really sure, or whether it really is just the level of symbol and myth for Jane Caputi.
It,
Um, so
it's
this is sort of a
hopeful
big
though.
question mark to me, because I just don't know. It can be a real dead end, and it can also be something that is quite inspiring to us, and the culture does need to be transformed, as well as, you know, the actual structures of power that we need to take down. So I don't know. This is a big question mark for me. What do you think, Marian?
It's hopeful. I mean, it's like, you know, trying to find hope in something that, I mean, what Lifton just said. I mean, basically, everybody traumatized. Well, this kind of, you know, psychic activism, again, I don't think that it works, but it's hopeful. And I think that there's something in between being just traumatized so that you just roll over and just, well, this is the way it is. And this, which is, you know, at least hopeful and trying to, you know, trying to make some real changes in the world. As long as that in itself doesn't become a, a power over, like in terms of domination. Um, I prefer to think of something like this, or think it would be more useful if it became a power with the earth rather than a power over all the bad things in the world, which is basically men. So I think that there's something in between this and being so traumatized that you can't do anything. And I think we should continue and seek to really find it.
There's, you know, throughout history, there's people in situations of extreme despair who turn to, a spiritual, you know, they put all their hope in some kind of spiritual help, you know, from another realm, and it
Yep.
never goes well. So you have the Boxer Rebellion, you have the Xochitl killing cult in South Africa, you have the ghost dance, the Lakota and the Plains people. There's example after example of people in really desperate situations believing with all their might that there's going to be help from another realm, and it's never come in all of human history. This never happened. There haven't been warriors from, you know, some other realm of existence who, you know, are suddenly here and fix it. So it is just something to be aware of, that I think under tremendous stress, we can all go there, but it and I'm not saying you can't find great solace and even healing in the spiritual realm, but in the here and now, we need actual warriors on the ground. Like, they're not going to come from some mythic realm and help us. That has never happened, and it's a very poor plan for how we're going to save the planet and take down patriarchy. It's just,
Yeah,
I don't
it's one
believe in
thing.
it, and I have no evidence that this has ever happened. So, and in just in, you know, learning about these other places where people have been driven there out of despair and, you know, utter hopelessness, it's just sad, because it you know, it ends, and it never, nobody appears to help them. It doesn't happen. Like, if they're there, they're not coming. So we really need to just pull it together and get it done. We're the only miracle we're going to get. So I'm
Yeah,
sorry, Marian, what were you going to say?
this is not a personal thing. This is not a personal spirituality thing. This is trying to set up a system, like just a better system, a good system, a system that's not traumatizing, but it's still a system. And this is why, you know, recovery programs, they tell people, you know, you need to find a higher power, but you choose your own conception of a higher power. Just choose your own. It's very individual. It's very personal. And it provides, you know, for many people, if they are successful with it, not this great system that saves them, but this like personal thing that most people don't even really talk about, apparently. It's not, you know, we don't just create a better system, because none of the systems that are trying to do what this is, none of the systems that are traumatizing us, are really effective in terms of long-term changes that make the world a decent place to live for women.
And I mean, there's something here that is really true as well. Like, I don't want to just dismiss this because we do need a different consciousness than the one that patriarchy gives us. And it is an incredible moment when that starts to break down for women and they step into this other world where women matter and where the things that happen to women matter. And you're able to say, yeah, this is rape or this is torture or this is wrong. And in the meantime, look at the
Yeah,
amazing things that women do. Like, you know, my grandmother raised me, or my mother did, worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. And like all the stories of just daily heroism that women have about, protecting their children and, trying to at least bring some beauty or love into desperate situations. So, and all of a sudden you can see that for what it is, whereas before it's just sort of the background that nobody notices. So becoming a radical feminist, like having all that break down, and then you have this different world where you put women at the center is an extraordinary thing. And it really is, the center of what we need to happen on this planet. So I get where she's going. I just have questions about what the downside of this, because I've sort of been down that path, when I was younger, and it doesn't end anywhere good. It ends in it being kind of useless. So I'm always a little bit like, I don't know whether this is, just be a little cautious with this kind of stuff is all
yeah.
that's all I'm saying.
Radical
Yeah.
feminism is a material analysis, and the
Yeah.
solutions, problems are material, and the solutions are material.
Yeah. Thank you. That's exactly it. Whoever said that. So thank you. Okay. Next slide. Was that the end of our slides? I don't even know.
Let's see. Is that the end of our slides?
Do you have more things you want to read, Marian? Because none of yours really got made into slides. I'm sorry about that.
I think there was
That might have been the end.
page 225. Yeah, there was one thing near the end, a quote from Dan Steiner, talking about war powers. This is in the section on the crone, older women, us old ladies. And she talks about war powers and quotes Stan Steiner. The year was 1600 or thereabouts, when tribal feminists decided that they had had enough of the unregulated warfare by their men. Lysistratas among the Indians, Iroquois women, proclaimed a boycott on lovemaking and childbearing. Until the men conceded to them the power to decide upon war and peace, there would be no more warriors, which is what we're seeing in the 3B movement in South Korea. And so the power that women have, as gossips, Gorgons and Crones, and you can read the book to find out, gossips is just women talking, which is terrifying to men. um, but this is about Crones, and this is about the wisdom of Crones and these Lysistratas of just refusal. That is not a constructed system. It's just it's an action by individual women, with the individual men in their lives that are no longer in their lives. So I think I really just like the fact that she put that in there, and that it's happened in the past. It's happening now, at least in one place. But this is something that can make a material difference, because it one by one changes the lives of everybody in the lives of the women who do it.
Yeah, and it's a recurring myth too around the world. Like you'll see this
Yeah.
sort of pop up in lots of different cultures. Like in the Southwest United States, there's a similar myth where they talk about how the men were just getting more and more violent and more abusive, and all the women one day just said, "We've had it. We're not doing this anymore." And they all got up and they moved across the river and they set up their own village. And like, we don't need men. And it's clear too in the telling of the story that the women were lovers with each other too. It wasn't just, we're leaving this, but they actually did create a whole new way to do things. So they all were just like, we're done. And so they had this great life for a while. And then finally the men were so miserable not having women at all that they sent, some emissaries over, and they're like, we're so sorry, we'll never do it again. Please, will you come back and live with us? And they're like, all right, we'll give it one more try, but you need to know that we've realized we don't need you. And if you ever behave like this again, we know we can leave. So there's that. And so this is a story that they tell, just so girls hear this growing up, that it's like, we don't have to take it. And it's not even just an individual can leave a bad situation, like an abusive husband. All the women can decide collectively, we don't need men for anything, and they can go. So it keeps the men in line, like, yeah, we just do what our mothers tell us, and it's all fine. Just nobody behave this way. And one of the interesting things is that, as women have gotten more control over their personal lives because of the actions of feminists. So, we got the vote, we got the capacity to participate in government, we can run for office, we're judges, we serve on juries, all of that happened because of the very serious activism that women spent their lives doing, broke down the boundaries into all the male professions. So, women are lawyers and doctors and all kinds of fun things now. Women have more power. And the divorce rate, of course, just keeps climbing. And I know a lot of the right-wing commentaries think this is the end of the world. But what it says to me is that, in fact, it's true what the first wave of feminists said, that if women could just get a little more power over their lives, they'd be able to leave these terrible situations. And maybe as a whole, women could create a better society. So I think we're at that point where women have decided that they can leave, and they do leave. They have enough, individual, they've got enough capacity to leave. They were given that by the actions of the women who came before. We can have bank accounts. I own a house. It's like, this is like the dream of every suffragette. Like, I'm completely independent here. I can do whatever I want. It's mine. And women can do that now. So they're not putting up with as much abuse as they ever had to 150 years ago. A lot of them leave when it gets bad, or they never get married at all, and they have children. So I think, like, part of this we have achieved, but the part that's hard is that, that matriarchal, that tribe is not there. So women end up on their own having to raise children. And that's like the part that I don't know how that comes back together. And because raising children is really difficult. Our young are very, very vulnerable for a very long time. So what it means is that, single moms are incredibly stressed out. They never get a moment to themselves. Like, we know how much they suffer trying to get it all done because it's just one adult with a bunch of children. And that was never really the plan. Like, we evolved in tribes of maybe 100 people. The reason being that our young are so vulnerable for so long that you do need a group of people to do it. And so if you're going to break out of the sort of patriarchal nuclear family, or the patriarchal endogamous family, where the exogamous, where the woman has to leave and go live with her husband's family, if we have enough power now where we don't have to do that anymore, we really do need this other social structure to be created, because it's leaving women and children, in a great deal of poverty and stress, and it doesn't seem to be working all that well on that level. So we kind of need that next part to happen, and I don't know how it happens, but that's what we need. So, Marian, what do you think?
Yeah,
I don't
it's
know how I
11
can
o'clock
top-
now, so just
I don't know how I can top
closing
Time to stop.
remarks.
Okay.
I don't know how I
Closing
can top
remarks.
that. I look on women as the default human being. And that's what we should be striving for.
Yeah, that should be at the center.
Yeah.
Women at the center. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. It's a good book. I recommend it. It's got its problems, but it's still worth reading.
Thanks everybody for being here.